Hi, Tiffany. Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders. Thank you for being here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Can you please briefly introduce yourself?
I'm Tiffany Hammond. I am the voice behind Fidgets and Fries. I'm an autistic self advocate, raising two autistic boys. Um, and I use my writing to tell stories, to educate people on what autism is, how it looks. And I am an advocate for all people. Um, and I just educate people on how to make sure their advocacy is intersectional and including everybody within the group and not just certain specific presentations of disability or autism. And yeah, that's it.
Great. So, when did you first discover your own autism?
I was 18 and I was a freshman in college and I was like 3 or 4 hours away from home. And that was when it kind of hit me more. Like I was always felt different growing up. And just everything I think was magnified when I was no longer at home and I was no longer surrounded by all those things that I used to make myself feel safe. Like I created like a safe space in my room, or I had a special place to go in the neighborhood, or and I didn't have that anymore. I was just kind of in a new place in a new city, with a lot of strangers and a lot of different responsibilities and things that I had to do and learn and do on my own. And at that point, I didn't have a diagnosis, of autism. So I didn't have the supports at school that probably would have helped me. This was just kind of just there. And I I lost a pin, and it was like a really, really special pin to me. It was like one I had forever. And it had a troll topper. And I you probably could have found that troll topper somewhere else, like online or somewhere, but this was my troll topper. It was special and I loved it. And I lost it at school, and I had in that most scary meltdown that I've ever had. And it made me miss class and a test, and I knew I had to take that test and I knew I could pass it, and I just couldn't go because I didn't have that pin. And I needed a note for missing class and missing that test. And I learned from other students that it was easier to get in with psych services than it was to get in with the regular clinic on campus. So I just made an appointment, same day. And while I'm in there filling out everything and talking to the psychologist and stuff, and he just stops and he says, um, have you been looked at for Asperger's? And I was like, what is that? And in the back of my head, I knew what he was saying because when I was diagnosed as depressed at age 16, that psychologist mentioned it as well. But it wasn't something that I was willing to explore further. Um, it was just I don't actually even know. I was still like kind of a kid then. And so a lot of it kind of went through your parents and
Hmm.
things like that. So I don't actually know what all happened in that instance, in that situation, and why I didn't really fully go any further with that. I just knew when I was 18, this guy was telling me about something that I had heard a few years prior. And I just was like, no, I never heard of that, And
Mhm.
he's like, well, let's just go and here. And he gave me a stack of evaluations. Was like, okay, whatever gets me the note so
Mhm.
I could turn it into to my professor. So I filled out those. Um, he went through some of it with me. He went over probably a few of those evaluations, and then the rest he said he'll get back with me later. So he gave me my note. I turned it in. Like I want to say like a week later, he called me. We went over everything, and he said, "I'm going to give you this formal diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome." And I was like, "Great." So now my anxiety has a weird name. So like that's what I was thinking. It was just like a weird type of anxiety. And I was like, this is typical of my life. Like, this is just okay. I can't even be regular anxious. I have to have a special name for it. And so he's explaining it to me, and it's like going in one ear and it's kind of going out the other. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. So I took the diagnosis. I told only my grandma. I did not tell my mom. I did not tell my sister. I did not tell anyone
Why
else.
not?
I don't at the time, I don't know. I felt like, and it's not like I'm not close with my mom and I'm not close with my sister. Like we're incredibly close. And I think I just felt like my grandma would understand more because she was more understanding when I was going through those like periods of my life that people didn't fully understand me, or they called me quirky or weird,
Mhm.
or um uh lonely, a loner. It's just all of those things that people would just like kind of hurl at me. She understood, and she made me feel better about it. And it was just kind of like easier to talk to her
Mhm.
about those things. I think it was just because she didn't live with us. So it's kind of like I can, you know, offload on her, just give her like just everything, and then it could sit with her at her house. I can unpack it with her, and she's
Mm.
not at my home. And then instead of unpacking it with my mom or like my sister, and then they have it in their head and it's just there. And then I didn't know if they were gonna like constantly remind me of this, or they were gonna treat me differently because of it, or what. It was just
Mm.
it was just easier. Just I'll tell her. I needed to tell someone. I didn't want to tell everyone, but I needed to get it out of me. And so I told her, and she just said, "Hmm, that makes sense." And then that was it. She just moved on. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's pretty easy." And so, like, I felt like maybe I could tell someone else, but it took me a long time to find somebody else that I could tell. Um, and I told my husband. Well, at the time, he was my friend, but I told him,
Yeah.
and but I think I had a different reason for telling him. I think it was just kind of like trying to push him away. Like, just like that's like, because I wasn't really good with talking with people or interacting with people. And then here's this guy who like actually seems like he wants to know me,
Mhm.
but I don't know what that feeling meant. Like what that all involved. It just felt taxing. It just felt like I got to use all of this words, so like all of these to talk to this person, and he always wants to know more, like and more, like, and it's just like,
Right.
oh,
How did he
and
respond when you told him that?
he responded just like my grandma did. It was just like I told him, and he was just like, "Oh, okay, well, you want to go to McDonald's?" And I was just like, "Oh, okay." So there was another person. There was a second person that was like easy to tell, and I felt like, wow, I can tell people this. But as I was like gearing up to tell other people, that's when I started to realize that the world wasn't as kind or accommodating as my grandma and my now husband was. It was a lot. I would see the the people make fun of the other people for just thinking they had a diagnosis, like in class, or
Mm.
and they wouldn't even know. They would just like assume that, or the horrible interactions that I had with my roommate because she saw firsthand the meltdowns, or me like talking to myself, or like me like fidgeting with different things, or kind of like rocking, or just kind of like she would see that, so then she would tell people, and then that kind of like spread, and I stayed in a small house, like, so it was like 30 girls, 30 freshman girls in a small house, and we shared everything. We shared the laundry, we shared the little kitchenette, we shared the great room, or the and everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew this person's business, so it was just a situation where I was like, I don't want to bring any more attention to myself. I don't want to do that. So I didn't really explore what Asperger's was it was Asperger's then, so autism. But I didn't explore what that diagnosis meant. Like, what does it actually mean? Like, why do I feel this way? Why do I have these sensory issues? Why do I, at that point, I'm just still thinking it's just this weird anxiety that I'm having. It's just, that's all it is. And all I got to do is just treat the anxiety, and then I'll feel better, And so I didn't really
Mhm.
like go into what is this? What does it mean? And and how does it affect my life? I didn't do
When
that.
did that change?
Huh. I want to say when my oldest was probably 9. It took that
Okay.
long. It
And
took
how
that
many
long.
years after your diagnosis was that?
Um, Probably like almost a decade or so. It
Oh,
was just,
okay.
it was,
Was it like some kind of denial?
yes, it was denial, it was like fear, it was, I think I felt almost more comfortable before I had kids with telling people, like I was building it up. I think I told like a couple of friends maybe my before I had my oldest. And he was diagnosed with autism at 17 months.
Mm.
And then that's when I went into full like sadness, and I don't want to say denial, because I felt like it was my fault. So I felt like it was just like this, I did this because I didn't fully accept um my diagnosis. I didn't learn what it was about. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't do any of this. And two, I was mad at genetics. I was mad at me. I was mad at like who I was, like, DNA. And that sent me into like a kind of like a deep, deep, dark space after he was diagnosed. It was just like, this was my fault. And then
Mm.
I didn't want to even fully confront the autism within me, because this is what, I did this to my son, and I didn't want to didn't want to learn about it. And I think I was in that space for probably, I want to say like 6 months or so after he was diagnosed. I was kind of just going through the motions. I was just doing what every one of the caseworkers said, just follow this protocol, sign him up for these programs, have him see these doctors, have him, and I was just kind of just I was still doing it, going through the motions. And one day I was just sitting and I was just like staring, and my grandma was just like, "What is wrong with you? Like, what is going on?" And I just told her, I was just like, "I did this and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to like do anything." And at this time I was having probably like a meltdown like once a week. I was burnt out, I was worn out, and I wasn't even attributing any of those feelings and those experiences. I wasn't even thinking that it was autism related. I was just thinking I was just like this horrible person, this horrible mom, this horrible being, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't sit for long periods of time in my child's therapy sessions. I couldn't understand why the lights in there was like annoying. I couldn't understand why I could hear them. I didn't understand. I thought it was just me not wanting to be there and with my son and see him go through those things, and that I gave to him. Like that's what I was looking at it as. She told me I just needed to one, I needed to come to grips with what I have. I needed to get
Hmm.
that together. I needed to understand that. And I was like, "Help me, please." And she's like, "No, I cannot help you to understand, who you are." She said, I can assist you with looking up materials and I can be supportive of you while you, go through it, but I can't tell you how to feel about, you." And so I spent about a week or so kind of deep diving into autism, what it was, and I gained an understanding, and I thought in the end it was gonna be an understanding for me, like I was gonna get it, and it was just gonna. But I took it a totally different route. I went full in to my child instead. So it was like,
Hmm.
okay, cool,
That's
I got it.
natural, though.
Yeah,
That's natural because you just want to take care of him and you want the
yeah,
best for him.
yeah. I thought I was gonna go into it and it was gonna understand it for me. It was gonna help me, and I get it.
Hmm.
And in some ways, it did, but it just sent me into like this like hyper state of like just helping my son. And so that's what I did. It was just all Aiden all the time, all everything. I was just in him, therapy, speech, OT. What is autism? What is it? Everything. All him all the time. Still wasn't really fully dealing with me,
Yeah, I see.
and I didn't really fully address my needs until Aiden turned 9 or 10, and he's 13 now.
Mm.
And it wasn't even really because of Aiden. It was because of my youngest, who was diagnosed at age 6. And we waited. I felt like he could have been diagnosed at 2. Like that's what I was seeing it. And even though he's verbal, like very, very verbal, I was seeing everything else. And in Jojo, that's my youngest, I see me so
Mm.
much. And it's like looking in like a mirror, and that kind of like it like, and you see those like shows or movies or something, and then the person is like living in like this like dream state or something, and something just like bolts them awake or like something.
Right, yeah.
That's what it was when I would look at my youngest. I'm like, that's me in little boy form, right? It's
Mm.
just like right there. in my face. And that's when I decided I needed to explore more about what autism was for me if I'm gonna better able help my my kids. Because once I started to realize that my youngest was like a little miniature version of me, then I started to realize that some of the ways that I was helping him was some of the ways that I was helping myself when I was growing up, like trying to cope with different things and
Mhm.
but not knowing what it was, not knowing that I was creating these little safe spaces and these little bubbles that I can exist in because of the environment was just too harsh for me. And I didn't realize why I was doing that, but I was doing it to try to like counteract that assault on my senses. And and I realized I was helping him. And I was like, I gotta explore more of me. And that's how I can help my kids. And that's when I started writing. I always wrote, like I always would write. My grandma showed me that because I think in pictures. And I don't have words running in there. And I don't have an inner monologue, which a lot of people don't really fully understand. But I don't. There's nothing,
Yeah.
I'm not like thinking of like what's gonna happen next and what's gonna happen. I talk out loud. I talk myself through
Mhm.
things. And so when I think in pictures and I can't always get it out, show me to write, write, write. So that's when I started writing. I started writing at a young age. And that helped me process things so I can revisit it later and try to figure out what was I thinking, what was going on, what was going on in this situation. And so I started to share. I started to journal what I was experiencing myself and what I was looking at within my children. And I would write it. And I had these journals, just full of journals. And then one day I was like, I don't know, maybe decide to share one, but I did. And everyone was like, you should blog, you should write, you should share more. And I did that on my Facebook. And so I would share a little bit more. And then so I would be like, more blog, you should do a blog. It's like, cool, whatever. I just dove into it. Didn't really know what I was doing when I did it. It's like, I just started a blog and I just shared on there. And then it just kind of, it was very unsuccessful in the beginning. Like, it was just me just sharing a bunch of stuff that didn't really make sense to, and I wrote better when I was writing for myself and then I would just happen to share it. But then when it was like a blog, it was just like, oh, the shares have to be more deliberate now and they have to be
Now you have an
more,
audience, right?
yeah. And so the writing suffered. I can admit that it was just bad.
Mm.
And and while a lot of people were still saying it was good, it was just bad. I didn't like it. I didn't do well at it. And I was burning myself out trying to maintain this blog I wasn't happy with and I wasn't, growing. And there was a lot of things going on in, our lives. And I was being more of an advocate in real life. I didn't think to write about that. I was just doing it. Like it was always a new fight. I was fighting with the schools. I was fighting with insurance companies. I was fighting with lawmakers. We were in Austin, like just sleeping in the Capitol building on the floor, just waiting to talk to someone, or going to a mock hearing or going. So I was doing all of that stuff on the outside of that blog. And I didn't think to like write about those experiences then. It was just trying to keep everything separate and just, write. But as I grew and learned, just as I tried to parent. I tried to just be a parent and not an autistic parent for so long. And I couldn't do that. Because autism is too, you know, such a part of me. It affects everything. It affects how I see the world and even how I see parenting. And I was trying to separate the two. And when I learned through writing and launching that initial blog that I couldn't separate the advocacy from it was seeping into my writing. Everything was touching everything. And I was like, I have to live completely whole in who I am.
Yeah.
And so I said I needed to shift. I needed to make a shift from talking primarily about being a parent because I'm not just a parent. And that's when I started to gain a little bit of like traction because I finally decided to give myself the permission to live whole, like and
Mhm.
completely me. And
Without, like, categorizing yourself
right, without
into these different
the
boxes,
little
yeah.
boxes. I mean, and the autism community itself will pit you against yourself. And it's just
Mm.
like this community is incredibly fractured. And I felt
Mm.
when I first started blogging, the only time that I would touch on those other identities that I claim was when I felt like I could definitely be the glue that glues everybody together. Cause I'm like the mom and
Mhm.
I'm like autistic and it can work, and that no, that couldn't be my responsibility. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of and it was just I couldn't do that.
Mhm.
I couldn't do that. And it's just I when I went and I shifted from being just a parent blogger to embracing everything, that was when I realized it wasn't really on me to heal this divide. I just want to create my own space, create my own community of sorts, something that was reflective of, everything that I am and a community that was, worthy of my children. And that's what I wanted to work on. I wanted to be like autism parent, autistic adults, autistic parent, woman, black, wife, daughter, sister, whatever. I wanted it all to be safe and welcome in this space. I wanted to create what I didn't see. And that is what I have been trying to work on full time for the last year or so, trying
Mhm.
to get that out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. Your blog is called Fidgets and Fries.
Yes.
And so your audience is all of those different groups that you mentioned, people who
Yes.
can relate to you. So what inspires you to write now?
Um, me, honestly. I'm not
Mhm.
trying to be like this. I never I think that's why when I was having the problems in the first place when I first started my blog, it's just like I wasn't thinking that much of myself. I wasn't selfish enough. I needed like a little part of me that was just like, you need to do this for you and how you feel and
Mm.
how you, operate and stuff. And that is what I go by. I always will say that the day that I am no longer saved by writing is the day that I will no longer do this. I will like shut down my blog. I will not advocate. I will not do any of this because writing is what holds me together. And so I have to write for myself and no one else. I always write for an audience of one. It's me.
Yeah.
And
Do you write do you write every day?
I write every day. I write every day. I write all the time. I like I wrote a like 3-page paper on our table, our dining room table.
What was it about?
I was trying to make it come to life. Like I was trying to challenge myself.
Ah,
I'm like, I
interesting.
wanted it to
Yeah.
be like this table and it's just sitting there and it has all these stories to tell, like from its humans that come and sit at it,
Mhm.
and all the nicks that it has, from the little human children who hit on it. It's just like
Yeah.
this table just had all these stories and it had all this history and all these things going on with it, and the table has had so many different chairs because the chairs have broken. So it's like it gets introduced to all these new chairs. I write about everything. um I write about life and taking things apart and examining their guts and writing about that and putting it back together. um but I write for me always, like always. And
Mhm.
if someone gains something from that, or they see themselves in whatever it is that I share, that's like so amazing. It makes me feel really good, but it doesn't make my day. Like I don't want like the support and the praise and stuff to build me up so much that the moment I receive like any type of criticism, it breaks me.
Mm.
And that's what's happened before, is that I was writing for the support, and I was writing for the praise, and I was writing for the likes, and I was writing for the everyone else. I was
Mhm.
trying to find what everybody else liked and put that out there. And
Right.
I wasn't writing for me. And so when someone didn't like something that I put out that I felt like they would like because I was catering to them, that broke me. It
Mhm.
like completely sent me into like these dark place. And so I always make sure that I write for me. I have to like and love what I put out there because it's mine. And I build myself up. And I build
Yeah.
myself up so big that if anybody doesn't like what I have to say, I'm not broken by that.
Mhm.
This is me. This is me and my life. And you could disagree with it, but it won't matter.
That's a powerful place to stand. Yeah.
Yeah, it took a long time to get there, but it took like so long to get there, and I probably would have got there sooner if I would have listened to my grandma. But
So, yeah. Tiffany, I want to talk about a blog post that you wrote about a month ago titled Am I Good Enough? In which you talk about feeling conflicted with your growth in the social media world in just a few short months. So, could you talk about why you were feeling that way?
I didn't know if I deserved it. It was part, like I was angry when I wrote it. It was like anger, and it was kind of mixed with a little bit of sadness and mixed with some frustration. And I was angry at everyone, and I was angry at myself because I was angry and I didn't know if I should be. And it was like me spending like 3 years or so. Like I didn't just start this. Like I spent like 3 years screaming into like the wind, I guess, about the issues that hurt us as not only Black Americans or Black people or Black disabled people or Black autistic people, just all of those. And no one was really hearing me, and no one was seeing me, and no one was understanding that pain and that I was going through, and they didn't get it. And I was spending all those hours in those hallways sleeping to talk to legislators, to tell other people's stories. I wasn't there to tell mine. I wasn't there to tell my kids. I was there to fight for other people who did not care about me.
What were you fighting about specifically?
We were going through oh, for starters, that Medicaid wait list is ridiculous. The waiver, that was
Mm.
the main thing I was down there for. Also, there was another waiver program, the MDCP, Medically Dependent Children's Program, I believe that's what it stood for. And my son used to be on it. And then they made cuts. And so many children got completely kicked off of it.
Mm.
And for my son to qualify in the first place for it, even though he definitely needed it, the nurse that came out had to almost jazz it up, had to make him even more disabled to get it. So those were the main things we were down there for. And I'm down there with a collection of stories from other families whose children has been kicked off, whose or their services have been cut, or and we're down there with a stack of stories, and one is mine, and like the 2 dozen more are not. And we're speaking on their behalf. We're attending the mock hearings, and we're learning all that we can. Me and my husband. And I am sharing our experiences that are unique to us as Black disabled people and families, and it's nothing. And you hear nothing, or when they do comment, they're like, um, well, I don't think it's a race thing. I think that we just need to all stick together, and it'll it's gonna all work out. They don't help disabled people in general. And I'm just like, okay.
Mm.
And it was just that's the same thing you get the entire time. And I was writing about that, and nobody was really hearing it. Nobody was getting it, except for the few people that did follow me at that time.
Mhm.
And then George Floyd happened, and he was murdered. And they went through that period on social media. They were like, well, we need to amplify Black voices and listen to us. And they blacked their squares and things like that. And so they started sharing my stuff a lot more. And so I think it reached somebody. I don't know who it reached, but it was somebody who had like a lot of followers. And then they shared it. And then so I started getting more and more people coming to my page. And it just kind of like blew up from there. And I didn't know how to handle that. I didn't know what it was. I wanted people to hear me.
Mhm.
Like I wanted them to understand what it is that I'm fighting for, what it is that I stand for, and want to help. You know, much in the same way that I help them, I want them to help me, but I want them to want to be here for that reason. And I couldn't tell if they were there because they saw something in my message that moved them, or if they were there because their favorite influencer told them to amplify Black voices and go follow people. And I did not know that. And that's what that piece came from. Is it was because I was saying that from a very young age, like we're taught that we have to be twice as smart, twice as fast, twice as brilliant, work twice as hard at everything.
You mean because you're Black?
Yes, sorry, I left that out.
That's
Wow.
okay.
um, yeah, and I didn't really fully understand it until I didn't understand why my grandma was and my mom was teaching me these things at such a young age until I experienced it at such a young age. I was 8 and I wrote a story about socks that came to life, and it just caused all kinds of trouble. And the teacher didn't think I wrote it. She
Wow.
basically accused me of not writing it. And I didn't understand it at the time. I'm just like, she said I didn't write it. And I wrote it, and it was just like a big thing. And
You mean more than just that you were 8 years old and that you could have been a good writer for being 8?
yes, more than that. It
Okay.
was just, I didn't get it at first at all until she would do other things throughout the year. And then I got it. I started to kind of understand it a little bit, but still, my 8-year-old brain is just like, we're not getting it just yet. They're not, not yet. But, as you get older, you learn it a little bit more. And um, I was saying that we work so hard to 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 show that we're capable enough and that we're brilliant enough or smart enough, and then when we finally are recognized for something, we don't know if we deserve it. And so that's what
Mhm.
made me frustrated with myself. I'm like, I know I'm a good writer, or, because I feel that. I feel it, and but here I am doubting like my ability to be a writer or to be an advocate or to be, you know, I didn't know. I was like doubting myself. I'm like this kid who grew up doing nothing but writing, grew up doing nothing but trying to make my own little world better for myself, and not just myself, all of my little animals. Like
Mhm.
I was advocating for little ants and animals and all kinds of little things, and I've been spending my life doing that, and then I doubted whether it was real or that I was good enough.
Mhm.
And that angered me. It angered me because I felt that way. It angered me because I live in a world that makes me feel that way. I was frustrated that it took the murder of George Floyd for people to see me. I was just angry and sad and frustrated. It was just like so many different like emotions that went through me, and then I just wrote that, and I was just like, I don't even know why y'all are here, really. And when I sent it, when I shared it, I was like, will I lose all the people that I just got by saying this? But I have to write for me, and I have to put that out there. That's what I was feeling at the time, and then I put it out.
Do you still feel that way, or have you thought about it more and you've shifted now?
I don't I don't know. My feelings are still kind of complicated on it. I do feel better about it when I these are those moments where I wish my grandma was here because all I have are her stories. And so I just kind of think back on something she told me one day when she was just like, um, she said something else might have gotten someone in the door, but you made them stay.
Mhm.
And so I was just
Exactly. You
thinking
know,
that.
and Tiffany, like, the thing with Instagram, people go to people's pages all the time, but not everyone follows. Not everyone
Yes.
becomes like a subscriber to your content. So your grandma's right. Like there's a reason that you have, what is it, like over 15,000 followers now?
Yeah. I try not to look at it. Because I
Yeah.
get more and more overwhelmed with it.
But
But
no, I've
thinking on
I've
that,
checked out your page and you have a lot of engagement. Like there, I'm not just trying to make you feel better, but I think this is important for people to understand too that um sometimes things may feel performative or whatever, but there oftentimes is like a genuine interest there too, you
yes,
know?
I am in a way better place than I was when I wrote that. I was just like, I was still trying to sort out Instagram first
Yeah.
because I was learning the whole thing. I was learning hashtags. I was learning all kinds of things at that time. And then when I just kind of had this explosive like growth period, it just took me like by surprise and just like shock and just like, wow, like I hope that the people here are here because they see something and they they relate to it and they want to help and they want to learn and they want to grow. And that it was like I couldn't find it in me to believe that just yet.
Mhm.
And I think it's just because I feel like like we're all like the sum of our histories and our context. And my history has shown that a lot of it was performative. And so like I enter into it like with doubts and I enter into it with skepticism. And so that kind of it was a lot of that playing in there in the back of my head. And then when I thought back on, my grandma's words and stuff, that made me feel a lot better. So I'm not in that same uh headspace that I was. I love and adore my the community that I have because they are, like you said, they are highly engaged. They are engaging with each other, and it's not just like autistic adults. It's also parents. It's also and they're engaging with each other, and there's
Mhm.
like very little conflict, and I can talk about the hard stuff. I can talk about racism and it not be received in the way that it was when I initially started talking
Yeah.
about it. And so that is incredibly amazing to me. Like some of the people that did amplify my voice or share me or whatever, I some of those people have been or accounts have been incredibly silent since then. Like they haven't you don't see it in their content, you don't see it in their shares, you don't see it in their posts. And that there is incredibly frustrating
Mm.
because you know their intentions weren't pure when they did it. But I'm trying to find um the good in it because they sent a lot of people my way that are. So
Right.
so I thank them for that. And I am very appreciative of all the people that are in my space that listen and they want to help and they do understand and they do get it. And I love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You're building a community.
Yeah.
And so what's it like to be an influencer?
Oh my gosh. It's weird and scary and overwhelming. That's why I don't check my follower count.
Mm.
Like I the last time I checked it, um I had hit 10,000 and I was so happy. because I got the swipe up button.
Yep,
That
everyone
was about
wants
it.
that.
I was like, okay, y'all can swipe up now because
Yeah.
I have such a hard time with trying to figure out links and then putting it where, and then I forget, and then so I'm like, oh my gosh, it just makes it so much easier. And so I was happy about that, but I was still overwhelmed. And I ended up checking again, and when I hit 11,000, I think I had a meltdown. I was so overwhelmed. It was like that's a lot of eyes. That's a
Mm.
lot
Mhm.
of people. That's like a lot, right? And I didn't even. I had to have my husband had to talk me off of like a talk me down, like bring me down, because it was just like so much. And I was like, I'm not checking the count anymore. So I haven't. I was
Okay.
not going to check it. And then I accidentally had to check it because I had to change my bio link. And so then I saw it again. I was like, oh my gosh. So like I'm trying to like practice like the breathing techniques they teach you in therapy and not get so overwhelmed by it. And then I get the messages. And then so I try to read every single message that I get. And then I try to respond to every single message that I get. And when I respond to them, it's the reactions that they have. And then that sends me into like even more overwhelmed because they're like, oh my gosh, you responded. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this.
Like
Oh my God.
starstruck.
Yeah. And then I'm just like, oh, like paper bag breathing. Like, 'cause I go overwhelmed, and like some will send like the video messages so they don't like type, and they're crying
Wow.
in it.
That just shows the impact that you're having on them. That's amazing.
That's what my husband said, and I'm like, I like it, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't. It's like I'm happy, and then I'm like overwhelmed at the same time. It's like
Right.
hard to describe the feeling. It's
Yeah.
just like
Do you feel some pressure that you need to like live up to some expectation?
I do, I do sometimes.
Mhm.
I feel like I feel like sometimes that people expect me to always be happy or like always positive about everything, and I'm not always happy or
Yeah.
positive or
I actually like that about your account though, because you keep it real and you talk about the struggles. And that's actually what people can really relate to, like that vulnerability. You know, it
yeah,
shows that you're a
I
human.
had to add that in there because I went through a period where it was like happy. I went through like it was all happy, and I was like, gosh, I'm not this happy. Like
Mm.
I'm really not. I'm like people are not this happy all the time. And I get into these states though where I am happy so much. And I'm so happy to the point where it hurts. And I think that's probably a symptom of my diagnosis. But so I I want to keep it kind of like a balance between, I don't want people to be in these dark spaces because of ableism or because of how disabled people are treated or because of racism or because I cannot live in those spaces for too long, but I do want to show that you know there are a lot of challenges in our lives. There are a lot of struggles that we all face, and I want to be able to balance that well without having it overtake my message. I don't want to. I go to some people's accounts and it's just like I just want to cry, like the entire time. I want to cry, and I don't want to be like relatable in that way. I want to show, you know, happiness and positivity, but also, we got a lot of work to do. There's a lot
Yeah.
of things we need to fix, and so I try to do that. I hope that it comes off like that. I know to some parents, because I do get their messages, sometimes they feel like I'm too positive with with autism. And
It's like you can never win, right? Like someone's always going to say
right.
something. It's
Yeah,
like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
right. It was what's weird is like I actually understand what they're saying. I get where they're coming from. And I think that also helps me though, because I think that being a parent and being autistic, it helps me a lot to kind of understand their perspectives. Most of the parents that do send me the messages that say that, they do still love and appreciate my content. You get those few that are a little bit, really
Hmm.
angry about it, but they want to be where I'm at. They want that. And it's just they aren't quite there yet, and they're just looking for like some guidance or some help or um something like so I definitely understand those parents a lot. And those
Hmm.
parents do need our help, and I do understand their struggles a lot.
Yeah.
So I love them too.
Yeah. So, Tiffany, I want to go back to what you were saying about, that intersectionality of the minority groups. And you recently posted something on Instagram about not feeling completely comfortable in the autism community. And the same for the neurodiversity movement because of these gaps in inclusion and diversity efforts. Could you
Yes.
elaborate on that?
I feel like I go on that was inspired by a lot of account like late at night because I don't sleep much. And I will travel down the rabbit hole that is Instagram, and I will read accounts and I will read comments and I will read because I try to get inspiration, or I just try to see what everybody's talking about, what's going on. And I see a lot of like inclusion, and I see a lot of diversity posts and comments, and then I'm in my head, I'm like, we do not implement those very well. We do not. I think that a lot of people are satisfied with just putting diverse bodies into spaces where they weren't any, and then they think that's what it is. Or with schools, and we're like, well, we're just gonna put more, disabled children with non-disabled children, and then that's it, and we're good.
Mm,
And I think that we don't go far enough. And I am exploring that post in so much greater detail, and I'm going to share that later sometime. But what I was getting at was that I don't feel comfortable within the autism community as a whole. If I did, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. Like,
mhm,
I wouldn't be. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of there's a hierarchy here, whether people want to admit it or not. And that's with all other disabled movements as well. It's like they're all centered in whiteness, and they all do not consider the needs of their black and indigenous populations. And so that was me saying I don't feel fully comfortable within the autism community. I also don't feel fully comfortable within the neurodiversity community either, for the same reasons. And when I wrote that, I was like, we got to figure out a way to, because at their core, intersectionality and neurodiversity want the same thing, and they examine the same types of things. And so, what would it be like if they work together instead of being two parallel concepts? And so I was thinking, I was like, how would they work? How would neurodiversity as a paradigm work with intersectionality as a theoretical concept. And so that's what I was exploring when I was writing that. I was like, what would they, how would that look? And I was like, I think we would have a better understanding of diversity and inclusion if we worked those two together. Like, what are their strengths in each? What are their core principles? Would they work well together? Could they work well together? And that's what I was doing there. I was writing it out, and I think I was trying to like find the answer myself as I was writing. I wanted to know like how would they work
Yeah.
together? Because I feel like they both want the same things.
Yeah. Definitely. And a lot of this can sound really abstract sometimes. So, what are some of your examples specifically? Like maybe could you put it in a real life example so that people can better understand?
So I'm seeing here, and
Like an example of the way it could work together.
so intersectionality. It looks at the our systems of privilege and oppression. So it's looking at um, not just all the ways that we are put at a disadvantage. It's also looking at the ways that we are privileged. It's looking at where power comes in and where power leaves. It's a power based concept. What intersectionality will do is it will take a person or a community, and it will look at where their power comes in and where their power depletes or where they have no power at all. And they are looking to find different ways that they can support that person or that community based on where their power fluctuates. You know, neurodiversity does similar, but in a kind of like a little bit of a different way. So what they are looking at is they're looking at how our brains operate and how it works within a society who mostly disables us because of how our minds work or because of how our bodies work. Um, they're looking at also where we are strong at and where society would view us as weak at, and looking at all the ways that they can address those needs and help those with different minds live successfully in this world. And so when you have these two, intersectionality and neurodiversity, both looking at different power structures, different privileges, different oppressions, and you have these two incredibly, what I feel are powerful concepts or powerful things, and they're operating in different lanes. I was just like, what if we put them together?
Hmm.
So I'm sitting there and I'm like, as a Black autistic woman, I'm disadvantaged in a lot of different ways. And intersectionality recognizes this. It shows where my power lies, and it'll show me where it doesn't. What can be done to fix that? You're looking at a Black child who's autistic, who will be diagnosed at a later age than a white child with autism. Um, excuse me, if they're diagnosed at all. But sometimes they're misdiagnosed. Sometimes they're not diagnosed at all, and sometimes they're given diagnoses of ODD,
Yeah.
um, or just simply ADHD. If even that, a lot of times we don't even get one, or they're diagnosed far later. So they're missing out on a lot of vital early intervention programs. They're missing out on a lot of services. Schools will suspend Black children at higher rates, um, expel them at higher rates. So then they're also missing out on services and supports there. So intersectionality will look at what is happening here, and they'll attempt to address that. Neurodiversity also does a similar thing. They're looking at their minds. They're looking at how their minds operate. Why is it that this mind is treated so differently than every other one?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that can be done to address that? And so when looking at both of them and dissecting both of their parts, right? Because I like to take things apart.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at them both separately, and you're looking at these and you're just like, they're kind of wanting similar things. They're kind of wanting the same types of things. They're looking at the same types of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why not try to figure out how well they could intersect? And a lot of times people don't really look at um intersectionality from a disabled perspective. See, a lot of times disabled people are left out of like a lot of conversations, majority of conversations, really. And so then, but then you have the neurodiversity movement, and they're not always looking at race.
Right.
They're usually just looking at neurotype. They're
Mm-hmm.
usually just approaching the issue as a state of how our minds are operating. They're just usually approaching it from me just being autistic.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking for solutions on how to help me as an autistic person. And then you typically neglect that I have these issues coming into me as being a Black person as well. So we need to introduce both. Introduce, because a lot of times neurodiversity isn't intersectional that much, especially when it cross sections with race or gender or sexuality. Anything. It's a large focus on a neurotype, how our brains are, and how we are disadvantaged in a society that leverages normal brains, quote unquote.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. You're bringing up a lot of great points, and you're creating that space, like you're saying, through your blog. You're
yes,
inviting the different angles to shed some light on areas that maybe weren't
that's what I'm
before.
trying to do. I mean, even if you even if you were to ask someone who's not in the disabled community at all, but they've heard of neurodiversity, and you're like, what do y'all guys think neurodiversity is? Most of the people that I've asked, they automatically assume it's an autistic movement.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't even consider the other neurotypes out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And so it's looked at as a wholly largely autistic thing. And they're missing all of the other neurodevelopmental diagnoses out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're missing ADHD, they're missing dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
They're missing those. They're missing those that have like autism and ADHD together,
Yeah. Right.
or if they have another type of learning disability together. And so at first I was like, well, okay, well, they don't really know that much about the neurodiversity community because they're like outside of it. So maybe that's why they just assume it's an autism thing. But when you actually break it down and you're sitting there and you're looking at it, it does look largely autistic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like it that's what dominates this movement, and it's like we aren't really looking at other diagnoses that make our minds different, that make our minds different from the general population. And that also, like, we're kind of intersectional in our neurotype as well. Listen, everything's not, one kind of thing. So
Yeah, and it's important to give everyone a
yeah,
voice and a place to stand.
yeah, that's what I think. That's why I was thinking they can work together.
Yeah.
I think that it can, just like as I was saying, I was like, intersectionality, or as it will look at me as a black person and a woman, and it'll combine those two, and then it'll show a completely new experience that I have.
Mhm.
So it's me being more than black. It's me being more than a woman. It's me being put together. And what experience? That's a completely new experience that I have. So if we were to find a way to put intersectionality together with neurodiversity, combine those, that would create an entirely different framework that we can operate under.
Yeah.
And maybe that will give us some better ways to address the issue of inclusion or diversity. What does that really mean? Like,
Yeah, and, like,
can
going
we
back
figure that? Yeah,
yeah, and, like, going back to your example about why Black autistic boys, are less likely to get a diagnosis, and kind of examining the why autism has a stigma in the Black community,
oh
and
man,
looking at that, but it's these kinds of conversations that need to happen to bring more awareness and give families more information about what's out there and what they can be looking for when they start to see signs.
that's
And then in
exactly
that way,
right.
like training more professionals in the Black community so that they can help people who might not otherwise have access to
That's exactly
services.
right. Yep. Like, even when you bring up something that, like, good, it's like, one, a lot of what's missing from autism research is the ethnic and racial minority groups. They're not even really that much in the research.
Mhm.
We also don't look too much at the influence of culture that has on not only how disability plays out in these communities, but how science also looks at us. They don't even look at, like culture. When I was in my doing my master's program, and we were reading case studies and looking at patients and trying to give them diagnoses of what we felt um, that they have, too few were given autism diagnoses to black and brown children. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, that's definitely what I feel these children have.
Mhm.
And they weren't considering the cultural aspects of how these children's lives were, or even how they were presenting in the evaluations. There's not a lot of inclusion of black and brown and people in the research.
Mhm.
And so the treatments and the
Exactly.
everything else, we're not included, and that has to change. And also
Mhm.
um we do need more clinicians and professionals of color, um also. And then you also highlighted something that's incredibly important, is that there's an incredible stigma within the black community for any type of diagnosis, really. I mean, it's bad. It's almost as if we're ghost here, like we don't even exist sometimes, and that is
How does that play
horrible.
out for you in your life with your 2 sons?
It was really hard when they were first diagnosed, and we had a lot of a lot of family members, especially for my youngest, a lot of family members who did not even acknowledge my youngest's diagnosis at all because he could speak. He talks to me. That's what they say. And but they don't realize that when he was in school, he went to school from pre-K all the way to like third grade. One teacher heard him talk and he said 2 words. That was it. He didn't talk at school at
Wow.
all. But they're like, when he talks to me, like they don't understand the entirety of his symptoms. They don't understand his diagnosis. So it was a lot of denial there. It was a lot of anger. It was a lot of like resentment on my part. I did not, and it was a lot of fallout. It was a lot of hurt feelings. It was bad. And they don't want to acknowledge the autism in my youngest. And they would acknowledge it in my oldest because he's more obvious, I guess.
Mm.
But they were treated differently. And so that was a big issue as well. It's probably part of the reason why I only told my grandma
Mm-hmm.
and my husband. Still sorting all of that out. And it's so weird though that I'm gonna like sidetrack real quick, but it's so weird because I have this like a big online presence now. And my sister is on my Facebook. She's on my Instagram. She has not brought it up. And I'm like wondering, I'm like, do you not know or do you know?
She hasn't brought up your autism, you mean?
Not yet. Not at all. And because I haven't told her at all, but it's so
Maybe she's just
weird.
waiting for you to tell her,
That's what I
like,
think. I was like, maybe
directly.
she's waiting for me to like say it. But she doesn't treat me any differently. She doesn't like say it. It's just,
What's
I always
holding you
find it
back?
weird. I don't know. Tell my husband, I'm like, we're just gonna sit down one day and I'm gonna do it.
Mm.
I'm just gonna do it.
That's so interesting that you can be so open to 15,000
Yeah.
people.
But not with my family. Not at all. I
Hmm.
don't know what it is. I don't know. I'm like, are like
Well,
I don't
it's
know.
probably coming from this stigma that you grew up with also and what you were hearing.
Yeah, it wasn't easy being a kid. It wasn't. And that's a lot of the reason why I treat my boys the way I do and why I share about them the way I do because it was not easy to be a kid and then not know what it was about you that was different or why everything was weird for you. Like why like, the experiences were just different and he didn't know why.
Right. Have you explained autism to your sons?
Yes. Well, it's a little challenging to do it with Aiden, but I still do it. I talk to
Hmm.
him just like I talk to JoJo, and I talk to him like he's anybody else because I feel like he understands me. So, but I keep doing it. It's so hard though with especially with my youngest. It it's so different. I revisit it every once in a while because it's just like keep him. Sometimes he doesn't want to talk about it. He's just like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And then other times he'll sit and he'll listen and he's just like, okay, okay,
Hmm.
I know. And
Yeah.
it's just like,
And
okay,
he'll have his own story when he grows up and looking
definitely.
back on and thinking, well, I always knew I had autism because my mom
Yeah.
would always talk to me about it.
That's what I try and I have this I would use different like stories and I'm like, you're just like me when I was like little and stuff and he's like, so like okay. And I went and got reevaluate it. I went for something else, like, because I just wanted to see, what was going on. Like, I felt depressed. But I was diagnosed with depression when I was 16. But I was like, let me go through this again because I don't have any like medications or any therapy or whatever. Just let me just go and see if this is what is wrong with me. So I went and got reevaluated again earlier this year and stuff. So I got my depression, and and I got um dysmorphia or something like that. I forgot what it was, but it was something else. And got my autism again. So
Yeah.
and so I'm showing him my paperwork because I actually had paperwork this time. Like, I had my diagnosis I carried with me for so long, and then I finally lost it in a move, like 4 or 5 years ago. But so I
Hmm.
have this new paper, and I'm like showing my son Jojo. I'm like, look, this is my diagnosis. This is what he says, and all he said was, "Hmm, all of that. Your packet's bigger than mine." I was like, but mine. I said, this is background. There's background in here, and he's like, the background's only half a page, mommy. I was like, okay, okay, fine.
Smart boy.
Yeah. So he's getting a little bit more comfortable with it, and not fully. He still wants to be, just JoJo
Yeah.
and everything. And he's not, a person. He's not a identity first person yet. So he would not like for you to say he's autistic.
Hmm.
He would like for you to just call him by his name, and you can say with autism, or, he has it. He's not there yet. That might change in the future. It might not. I don't know.
Yeah.
I used to be a person first person whenever I did say it. Um, so like everybody goes through their own,
Hmm. And there's no right or wrong.
yeah,
It's just whatever you're comfortable with.
it's what he likes. So every once in a while I bring it up, but
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, I do want to be mindful of the time because I feel like we could just keep chatting forever. You're really fun to talk to. And it's funny that you were saying that you haven't done so many podcasts yet, although you've done a few now, but you like to write more because you think that you're a better writer. But I think you're a really great speaker. So I
thanks.
encourage you to keep using your voice to spread your message. But I do want to close with one last question. What advice would you give to other autistic mothers?
Ooh, definitely take time for yourself. Definitely like lean into those feelings that you have. Like, don't push them aside. I know that's like the first thing you want to do because you're like a mom, you're a mother, you want to always put your kids first. You want to always put them above everything. But doing so is honestly doing so is in the long run is hard for neurotypical moms, but it's like even harder for us because if we do not allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel or take the time that we need to take to process everything or anything around us, we will burn out or we will melt down. We're no good to our children, um, or anyone else. We're not even
Hmm.
good to ourselves. And I learned that the hard way a lot. Um, but that's probably like my biggest thing is to definitely just take care of you and listen to your body. Know your triggers, know your environment, know your surroundings. If you feel, I know for me, I can generally feel when a burnout is coming, and I can generally feel when if a meltdown is on me. Not always, but a lot of the times. And then so I'll try to, take a step back, try to figure out what's going on, figure out those feelings before it happens. So that's just probably my biggest advice is
Yeah, well, that's great.
just
That's really helpful, I think, for any mother that's out there. All right, Tiffany, how can people learn more about you?
I am on Twitter, Fidgets and Fries. I am on Facebook, Fidgets and Fries as well. I'm on Instagram, Fidgets and Fries. There's a period between each word. Um, and I also just finished my website, so it's fidgetsandfries.com. So I'm on there. And I have a Patreon, which is under my name, Tiffany Hammond, where I do all things advocacy all the time. So I can free up my Instagram space
Yeah,
on there. But yeah, and that's
cool.
where you can find me.
I'll put links to all of those in our show notes.
Yay.
All right, Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on the show and
Thank
just
you.
sharing yourself. I think this is
Yeah.
going to be really helpful for a lot of people to understand what it's like to discover your diagnosis and to also navigate the social media world and the neurodiversity movement intersecting with intersectionality. So we covered a lot of topics here. So thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Tiffany brought up some important points about both the overlap and the gap between intersectionality and neurodiversity. When examining how a person fits into society, or how society can adapt to that person, it's essential to recognize where power imbalances lie and how specific challenges may be unique to certain groups. As we've previously discussed on this podcast, the autism spectrum is complex, and we need to look at each person separately instead of defaulting to stereotypes. However, on top of the varying characteristics of autism, a myriad of shared factors can have an effect on individual experiences. For example, an autistic gay man in the US, who was diagnosed later in life, may face struggles different from those of an autistic heterosexual woman in China who received early intervention services. Similarly, other variables such as their socioeconomic status and ethnicity, as well as the level of understanding of autism in their communities, can affect the way their individual experiences are formed. Continuing to identify these differences and similarities will allow for more targeted solutions so that more people can have access to education, services, and a better quality of life across the board. In order to cultivate a community where all voices are heard, we need to start by paying attention to what they have to say. Thanks for listening. Take care. You've been watching Autism Knows No Borders. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think in the comment section. Click here to watch another interview from our podcast. You can also find us on your favorite podcast app. Tune in each week for engaging conversations of how people across the globe are inspiring change and building community. Thanks for watching. Take care.